What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and this is my brutally honest review for the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters. Now let's start things off by talking about what the heck these games are. These are essentially going to be complete remakes of the original classic Final Fantasy games. Now the reason this is just a bit strange is because, as many fans know, there is a bunch of remakes that already exist of the oldest Final Fantasies. It seems like every couple of years we see Square Enix just go back and do a different, slightly tweaked and updated version of these games, from hand-drawn art to new translations or even just adding in some extra bonus dungeons or something. Now each of these different versions has been fun. I am a gigantic fan of Final Fantasy. It is in fact my favorite franchise of all time. I very much pride myself on the fact that not only have I beaten every single Final Fantasy game, but I've gone through and finished every version of each of the games. So I consider myself to be a bit of an RPG expert when it comes to this series specifically. So that's part of the reason I wanted to do just a deep analysis to tell you the goods and bads of the Pixel Remasters, because these are a very interesting new style of take. It seems pretty clear this time around that the developers are trying to do things right, actually just focusing on each of these retro masterpieces and doing them great individually one by one. But let me start off by talking about this new style of graphics. Now these games are completely rebuilt from the ground up. These are definitely new games that are fully remade, and that is very, very neat. These new graphics and art are very different, but they're also just so stunning and clean. They're just great to look at. The new character models, bosses, and even battle animations that have been freshly done completely from scratch. Now they are just very different. That is an important note to say here, is that they definitely decided to take some creative liberties to try and make people look a bit more humanistic and less chibi and tiny. They definitely try to make this look a bit more detailed, even with this tiny pixel art. But to me personally, this makes it worth the price completely on its own. As soon as I started to play this game and see the changes and alterations they're making to sort of update this experience, I think it is a nice new take on the classic style. If anything, this feels like it is closer to the original creators' visions. I mean, let's just face facts. Decades ago, when they were choosing their art styles and trying to make these games as best as possible, they were held back by the limitations of the technology at the time. This feels like it is a much more expressive and, of course, just more detailed art style that seems to convey the action, the elements, and the cutscenes a lot better than ever before. There is, unfortunately, a bit of a technical error, it seems, which is that, for me anyways, I encountered quite a bit of screen tearing, times where there were these weird lines in the middle of the screen while I was in major cities specifically. When I was in battles, the visuals were fine. When I'm going through the fields, things are pretty smooth. It was just in the towns when suddenly it just didn't quite look right, which was definitely distracting. But this does bring me to the biggest downside. The text and font in this game is straight up garbage. It seems like the designers are sort of catering to the mobile market. They want these blocky letters that are very easy to read, unlike a cell phone screen. But running this on a 40-inch monitor is painfully bad. Also, keep in mind, these are RPGs. They're very long ones, in fact, which means that you're going to be spending 90% of your total playtime staring at these agonizingly just awful lettering. I wish we had more options to try and tinker and change this. Now, this is being released on PC currently. I'm actually running this on Steam, so I'm pretty sure that somebody is going to release a free mod relatively soon, at least I hope, to try and fix this to not look so cringy and freaking bad. Now, to go with this, though, I do want to talk about one of the more interesting updates is the fact that they've completely remixed the retro music by the master himself. The original creator of all the soundtracks of Final Fantasy, Nobuo Uematsu, is back. He returned just to remix and do every soundtrack again, and it is glorious. I say this as a person who does appreciate the classic versions of these. I think the updated music is just freaking amazing. It is just every note, everything is just so deep and rich and fantastic. fantastic. Hearing these fresh songs, hearing a chance to see these classics done in a more modernized, crazy, exuberant fashion, I love what they've done it. Now, let's just say this. Each of the Final Fantasy games has their different benefits to them. There's different appeals to the stories, to the worlds, and sometimes just to the classes we get to play. Even though each of these games is just being completely rebuilt from the ground up, they somehow still feel like a great homage to what they're trying to be based on. They are the same game, they're being done again, but they also feel like a fresh take. They feel like something that's managed to be updated and different, but still just as beloved as the classic games were. Now I want to talk about one of the strangest changes, and perhaps the thing I think is going to be the most controversial. They have tweaked the gameplay a bit. There's been some refinements, like they've added in an auto battle system, making it where whenever you're in a low level zone or you're just trying to grind a bit before continuing forward, you can make it where the fights happen automatically. Other RPGs over the years have experimented with this idea, but it definitely feels very at home here in classic Final Fantasy, where you are doing a bunch of basic attacks over and over again to level up and get ready for that next boss. This is a good touch. There are these new features that have been added that completely change the game in some subtle fashions, like the fact that there is now an autosave system, so anytime you actually walk into or out of a dungeon, it creates an automatic checkpoint. So if you die, it doesn't depend on the last time you remembered to click the save button. They've also made it much more easy to navigate certain areas, and also created a tiny mini-map. That way you can actually see landmarks like local shops or even just upcoming cities you need to visit. These things, as much as they seem like tiny details, really make this a much more streamlined experience. I like the fact that it definitely makes it where you have the tools to do stuff and figure out problems on your own, but also it feels like a modern take on these classic games we love so much. I've always considered myself to be a bit lucky when it comes to the Final Fantasy series because I jumped on so early on. I've had a chance to grow up with such a fantastic series of games, and now seeing them again with all these little tweaks and changes, they definitely feel like better experiences because of it. A lot of these games, these chances to explore these ancient kingdoms and see swords and sorcery, the Warriors of Light going against Garland and Chaos, and all these different quests, the writing is still so amazing. These fights are still so incredible. Grinding and leveling up still feels as great as it always has, and if anything, these additions to it just make the true passion of what made them great in the first place shine through even better. They also have definitely gone into the code to equalize certain enemies, because there was just at times some brokenly strong enemies that would open up in certain areas, and it could be very frustrating to walk and grind and level up and then just get completely smashed by a random giant or something like that. They've definitely put a lot of effort into trying to make this game basically just more fair, more balanced, and honestly, the biggest reason I do like this is that it does feel like an updated version of the classic 80s games we know and love. For this video, I've decided to play through a bunch of Final Fantasy 1 and Final Fantasy 3, which previously was only done in America in certain versions, and I think this is a very great rendition of it. If you are a fan of classic Final Fantasy, it seems as if the Pixel Remasters are the correct path. It seems like this is the proper way to go through these games again, at least in their current format. I'm sure they're going to remake them again in a couple years because it's Square Enix and they're obsessed with pressing copy-paste on their own projects. The true appeal of these games has obviously always just been the ability to go back and play some of the best and first role-playing games that have ever been created and see how they still stand up. And so I think these tweaks and changes definitely make it much more accessible and honestly just more gorgeous. They did also add in a couple just completely new things like a beastiary, so you can look at the different enemies as you encounter them, an illustration gallery so you can see some of the original art pieces that inspired and were used by the artists to make this game initially, and even a music player so you can actually jam out on these new tunes. I love pretty much everything about this. I'm a big Final Fantasy fanboy, so of course I was going to, but I'm glad they didn't screw this up. It's weird, it plays a bit strangely when it comes to just the PC base, but it makes me think that if they could bring this to consoles, hopefully this comes to Nintendo Switch, to Xbox, and to PlayStation, because I want to really pop some trophies and achievements as fast as possible. Okay, so we've heard some good and some bad, but let's go over the ratings board and put a big number on it. I am giving the Final Fantasy Pixel Remasters a 9 out of 10. If you're somebody that was already a big fan of these games in the past and you just want an excuse to come back and play them again, these are some very solid updates, and I do recommend you check them out. And if you're a newcomer, these are a good place to start. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all, and keep dreaming. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.